well, not faffing around showing you how to get forks out of yokes. That's the easy bit. But the bike's nicely supported on my new lift there. Very stable, in fact, so I'm well chuffed with that. But let's go over to the bench and have a look at these forks, and I'll show you what I've been doing with them. So the first thing you do when you've got the fork out of the bike is that you remove the spring cap. So you take off the rubber dust cover off the top, and then the idea is this spring is inside the inner tube here, and this is just a simple bucket arrangement with a little O-ring around it that sits inside the top of the inner fork tube, and it should just push down against the pressure of the spring, but it doesn't. It's too corroded, and it should be held in place by this little clip, and it doesn't need to be because it's just so corroded it's not going anywhere. So what I did is I had to use a drift made of I think it's a piece of 10 or 12 mil dowel and a nut and a 30 mil socket. So I'm going to show you how I actually use that drift to push down on this bucket, just to push it away from this little clip in order to pull this out, and then following on from that I had to apply another technique to actually then pull the little bucket, the spring seat, out of the tube, because it should have just popped out at that point, nothing holding it in apart from just 26 years of corrosion. So I had to use, and if you can see the sort of shape's got an O-ring around it, so there's actually a lip all the way, you can see there's a lip all the way around inside there, and what you can do is you can get a little puller behind it, one of these little things that you buy in a set, and you can use a sort of standard slide hammer. I can tell you a couple of whacks with that and it came straight out. So that's the first technique, and I'm going to show you how I used the drift to push it down, because I used the yokes of the actual bike to do that, and then I'll show you me removing it with the slide hammer when we do the other fork, of course. The next thing that you take out there then is the remove the spring, and then you can get to the damper rod. And the problem you're going to have then is when you try and turn the damper rod bolt, the damper rod itself is going to keep trying to turn, and there is a special tool that you can buy to do it, or you can just go and get a piece of wooden dowel and taper it at the end, and essentially that just forces into the end of the damper rod, and I can tell you it works very, very well. It's just enough to hold it in place while you turn that damper rod bolt. And then once you've got that out, you should just be able to pull the inner fork tube out of the outer fork tube and disassemble the whole thing. Now, my Haynes manual quite clearly said that when you pull this out of the outer fork tube, you should be able to use this like a slide hammer, which should pull on the bushings and the seal and just pop them out. Now that is the case on other bikes that I've worked on, but it doesn't seem to be the case on this one. There's no flange on the end of this inner fork tube at all, and when you look at the top of the actual outer fork, the oil seal just literally pops down in. It just sits on that lip there, so it's completely blind. So I had no choice but to dig it out, actually, just using a screwdriver. It took a little bit of work, but I got there in the end. So what I'm going to do is I am going to get this fork all cleaned up and put back together, and I'll show you a little bit of me doing that, and then I'll show you the process of disassembling the other fork using the techniques that I've just run through. Just crack this ooh, I think that's just turning fork, so Okay. Right, so that is actually turning the whole inner fork tube, so that means the damper rod's turning as well. And so I can't get this off at this stage. Look how filthy that is. So someone's stuck some grease up there in the past for some reason, I don't know why. Anyway, there you go. Right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the top cap off then, and we'll do it that way. So we'll get this off. First job. It was pretty scuzzy in there. So you can see right there, that's the little circlip. Oh no, it's not, sorry, that is the top of the spring seat. So we need to push that down to get to the circlip, which you might just be able to make out just behind it there. There's that slight little ring there. So we need to push this down. We'll do that by putting this back in the yoke and driving it down using the drift like we did with the first one. Right. Anyway, there you go. So you can see the setup there. You've got the dowel and the 30mm socket and the nut that will drive between the two yokes. And we just need to push that. That's just another 14 or I think 14mm socket on the end there, just to spread the load a bit. So we just need to push that spring seat down a little bit that it's sat in by millimeters, and then you can see just there that white sort of circular line there. That is just the top. Just below that is the no, that is the actual circlip. Okay, so that's the bit we need to get out. So we just need to push this bucket down a couple of mil, and then that should just come straight out. According to Haynes, you should just be able to push that down with like a Phillips screwdriver against the pressure of the spring, but yeah, no, that ain't having any of it. So let's just start to wind this down. Oh, hang on, I've got the right screwdriver. Yep. Oh, wrong way. Last time what happened is the fork tube started to push down instead, so I just had to nip that nut up a bit. Right, there you go. I'm astonished that one's gone down really quickly without any pressure, any force at all, really. So you can see the bottom of the bucket there, and that white ring just above it is the actual circlip. So we just need to tease that out, and then get the fork back out to get the bucket out. Well, at least it's good. At least it is in good condition. It's very springy and it fits in the groove, so can't complain about that. Just want it to pop out. Right. Okay, you don't want to watch this all day. Okay, there you go. You can see it's just sprung out now. I used two of these little electrical screwdrivers. One of them I just poked underneath the circlip, and one of them I just put behind the circlip there, and as I pulled this one out, the one that was just underneath there just gave it a bit of spring, and it just popped straight out just like that. So yeah, it's just technique and tools, isn't it, really? And I have to say this one's being a little easier than the first one. Maybe it's just because I know what I'm doing with it now. So anyway, we're going to get the fork back out, and we shall remove the spring seat. So that's technique number 2. There's absolutely nothing nothing whatsoever stopping that from just lifting out, apart from the friction created by the corrosion inside all the tube and on the spring seat itself, which is yeah, a really weird design. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and get this spring seat out. We need to pull it out, and you can see the lip that you've got there that you can get behind with a puller and use a slide hammer on. And the last one came out with a couple of whacks, and this one seems to be a little less corroded, so I've got no concerns about that coming out. What I'm going to do though, I'm just going to drain the oil, so we just need to remove the drain screw there. Oh, okay, it's not too stiff. Yuck, the colour of that. So this is what I'm going to use to get that bucket out. You can see it's just a puller, and as I wind this down, this will open up behind the lip down in that spring seat, and then I should just be able to use the slide hammer. Let's just there you go, that's dropped in. Right. Okay, here goes. Well, sorry guys, you didn't see that because I didn't even get to use the slide hammer. I literally just lifted up the whole thing with the slide hammer, and the pressure inside just seemed to be enough to make it pop. So there you go. Okay, so what I need to do now is get the damper rod undone. So the bolt still seems to be tight in the damper rod. So I'm going to get the vise. Oh no, the vise is back on the bench now. I'm going to get the wooden dowel out, and hopefully we'll make that. We'll get that nut loose. So there you go. Look, sorry, that's yeah, slight disappointment there because the thing popped out without any slide hammering action whatsoever. Just for the fact I was threatening to pull on it, it popped straight out. This side is definitely far less corroded. There you go. This side is definitely by far less corroded than. Just focus on that. Focus. Focus. Far less corroded than the other side. So, but what I will do is, you can see there's still a bit of corrosion on there. I will get the wire wheel on this and just give it a bit of a clean up again before I put it back in, and I might just give the inside seating of the inner fork tube a bit of a clean up, as in a wire brushing before I clean it all out, and that'll just make sure it all goes back fine. But this side's definitely a lot cleaner. Anyway, I'll go and get this back out, and we'll get that what do you call it, the damper rod out now. Cool. Just going to stick that drain screw back in. That's firmly wedged into the end of the damper rod, and that gives me some good. So all I need to do now, so I'm using a 6mm hex, like an Allen bit, hopefully, now if I try and just turn that, that is just going to turn the whole thing. So I just need to put some pressure on it. So hopefully we can make this work. Do 2 pairs of hands here. There you go. Should just be able to pull. Look at that. As if to demonstrate, we've got the damper rod on the end of the dowel there. So let's, there you go, that's that out. And then I'm assuming the spring for this is still inside there, and in here is the, there you go, just the end cap. It's got a special name, can't remember what it is for the moment. And let's see if the spring is in. There you go, there's the spring, which normally just sits on the damper rod. There you go, look. So this is kind of wedged in the top there. Here we go then, here's all the pieces, get them out of the way. So you've got your spring in the middle, that's a nice easy one to explain. You've got the just the spring seat bits at the top, so just your very top dust cap. The spring seat itself, which I showed you, is actually pretty good compared to the other one that we took off. There's not really any corrosion on that, but and it did pop out mostly of its own accord, and that shouldn't be any trouble getting back in. The other one was a little stiffer, and of course then you've got the O-ring, not the O-ring, sorry, just the circlip, and that's pretty good as well. So I think that fork has been taken apart more recently. There was certainly a lot of grease right up inside the bottom of the fork where the damper rod bolt went. So I'm just wondering if that's been serviced more recently, but this was the one that was leaking. So anyway, so the damper rod and the spring go down through the top of the inner fork tube, and then the damper rod should poke out of the bottom. It can't go all the way through, it's stopped, and then the oil lock piece goes on, and then the whole thing slides down into the outer tube, and then the bolt then meets up with the bottom of the damper rod. Okay, and the inner fork tube is free to slide up and down the damper rod. That's its distance of travel, essentially, of what it's allowed to travel. So nice and easy. You just need to clean it all up now and get it all back together, except of course I have got to just take off the dust cover there, and then just below it the oil seal. But as you can see, that's completely blind. So where the Haynes manual is telling you to use that inner fork tube as kind of a slide hammer, no, there's absolutely no flange on the bottom of the tube there, and that is completely flush. It's blind. So that technique doesn't work on this type of fork. So I don't know whether maybe this fork is off a later model or an earlier model, or even off a 700 that might have been had slightly different forks. I don't know, but the manual is definitely wrong. So as before, I'm just going to take that dust cover off, and I'm going to pick that. I'm going to pick the old seal out, but I'm not going to take the bushings out. I'm just going to leave them in place, and then we'll get the new oil seal in. It's in pretty good lick, this dust cover at the top, it looks it anyway. So I just wonder if this has been done more recently. I've owned this bike about 3 years now, but I've not really ridden it because I've been doing all the work and stuff on it. But I just got a feeling that came out easy. That is pretty good and clean. Pretty good. Just need to get the spring. There you go, and that's just the little sort of circlip goes and holds that in. So we just need to get that oil seal out now. There you go, that's all the fork assembly all cleaned up, just using rags and rods. And I just cleaned up this top circlip with a bit of sandpaper. There's a tiny bit of corrosion on that. As I said, that's pretty good. I've cleaned all that up, that's okay. These are all fine. This just needs to go on the bench drill with a circular brush, which I'll do next. But all these bits are all nice and clean. These tubes are all cleaned out, which is good. Nice and whistly clean now all the way down through the bore. And even with these sort of little eyelets there on the damper rod, I just used some carburetor cleaners. It was quite interesting because it did poke out a little bit of grit and dirt into the bore, which I then just cleaned out with rags quite easily, which is good. You just need to make sure these threads in there are all clean so that the bolt doesn't bind up or anything like that. You can't really see the threads there, but anyway, so that's all good and ready to go back together. I'm just going to give this spring seat a clean up, as I said, on the bench drill with a circular brush, and then that should be all ready to reassemble. These forks are actually really you've got a tiny bit of marking and corrosion there, but if they had lots of rust and corrosion at the top, which you do get because they're a part that just sits outside of the fork, in a outer fork tube, they do get a lot of corrosion and pitting and stuff. You wouldn't want to be sliding a seal over, but these are really whistly clean, so that's more staining than anything. There's nothing really there. There's no marks or burrs or anything like that. So anyway, I'm going to slide the fork seal just over. Just do it the right way. There it goes. There you go. Tape the end of this. It's just to soften it. That's all it is really, nothing more than. More than just trying to reduce the amount of hard edge that comes into contact with the seal. It's not obviously the mating surface, but you can deform it. There you go. Okay, there you go. I think you can see reasonably well that that's driven all the way home. It's a nice fit. So all it needs doing now is putting this spring in, filling it, well no, putting the oil in, measuring that correctly, then putting the spring in, and then just fitting the spring seat with the circlip. Oh, and I do need to obviously put the retainer clip for the oil seal and the dust cover on as well, so that's just a quick job. Anyway, Yeah, she's in. So I need 228 cubic centimeters or milliliters. I'll get my measurements right this time. Keep calling it centiliters, which would be way too much. So 228 milliliters. You need to fit that in there, I think. 228 milliliters or cubic centimeters. And I've just calculated with this on the bench, holding it level, that I should leave about 50 mil in the bottom. So I can always tip some out, of course. And that should be 176 mil from the top. So you do this with you do this with the fork completely down, the inner fork tube completely compressed, and no spring in there. There you go, bang on. So I'm just going to put it into the lower yoke, and then I'll just do that pinch bolt up as tight as possible. Well, tight enough anyway. So when you slot the spring in, you need to make sure the more closely wound coils are at the top. Because that's what it says in the Haynes manual. And I'm just going to extend this tube out. There you go. See, that's still quite strong, that spring there. You would never be able to, well, I say never. Yeah, it would be very difficult to push the spring seat down and hold it down and get the clip in. I think that would be very difficult. So anyway, I just need to go and put the O-ring back on and set up the drift so that we can just drive and hold it in place. Just using a 14mm socket just to spread the load a little bit, because it's obviously wider than the that dowel. So there you go. That certainly looks a lot cleaner, doesn't it, than when it all came out. There you go. If I just bring a torch in there, you can see how far down that spring seat's gone, and that groove, I think it's the lower of the two actually, where the ring sits. This might be a little fiddly, but the last one went in okay, so there you go, it's in. There you go, see, so obviously I took the pressure off the dowling, and if you can see there, that's just risen back up under spring pressure and is now, see, just the rim of the spring seat touching the circlip there, so it's just come back up to its natural position. So anyway, I'm just going to stick a little bit of grease down in there just to stop that from, or just to protect it a little bit, hopefully stop a bit of water ingress. But I mean, it took 26, 27 years for that other one to get in a cruddy state. This one seemed better anyway. But literally just need to put the cap back on, that's done. Well, as you can see, it's all back together again, and since just getting on that spring seat on the top there and just finishing it off, I had to take both forks back off because I had multiple issues. So firstly, what was happening is when I got all the wheel back on, all the forks tightened up and in place, I gave the handlebars a bit of a rock just to test the suspension, see how good it was, just to discover that it weren't good. Not at all. Push it down, it wouldn't pop back up again. So something was wrong, something major was wrong, and I had a suspicion that I damaged this seal. This was the first fork that I did, and the one that I did off camera, and I did it off camera because I just wanted to have a go at doing the first fork. I'm not an expert, I'm not a mechanic, I'm just a hobby DIYist with a shed load of tools, and I think I messed it up because driving it in, I didn't use the same method that I used on this one. With this one, I used just a 30mm without the inner fork tube being in there. I just used a 30mm socket and gave it a tap tap tap, and I don't think it went in straight, and I think it damaged it. These things are kind of, they look like, you know, a very tough plasticky neoprene type, I don't know what they're made of, but they've got metal inserts inside them, and I think I buckled it or bent it. I know it went in wonky. Certainly when I put the fork tube in, it felt a bit stiff when I was trying to operate it, but nevertheless I finished it up and got it back on the bike. So I think that's what caused this problem with pushing the handlebars down and it just not springing back up again. I think this was too tight. Also had an issue with the spring seat at the top, because as I was rocking it, I could stand up off the bike and I could pull the handlebars back up and it would kind of come back up again, but as I was kind of operating it very slowly, you could hear a hissing from the spring seat here, and then as I take the cap off the top, it would go pop and a load of air would escape. So it was clear that the spring seat had gone in, but it wasn't sealing properly. Certainly not sealed in the way it was when it came out the first time. But of course, that was through 26, 27 years or whatever, of 26 years of corrosion. So anyway, so I got the fork back off, and also had an issue with this one, because feeling down the bottom where the damper rod bolt goes up and in, it was wet, and it was seeping fork oil. So I had a job getting the damper rod bolt back in when it was on the bench. Not a job getting the bolt back in, but done up tight. And I just thought, do you know what? When it's on the bike and it's under spring pressure, I'll be able to get the 6mm hex in there, and I'll be able to give it a good turn and turn it up tight. But no, you could hear the spring inside turning, which meant the damper rod was turning. So that one had to come off as well, because leaky fork at the bottom. The spring seat was absolutely fine, but obviously leaking at the bottom, it wouldn't be long before you lost most of the oil and it would just be useless. So had to get the whole assembly back out again. Bike back up on the stand and wheel off, forks off. So I stripped this one down again. I took the seal out and put the new seal back in using my long pipe drift that I'd edged with electrical tape to soften it, and it drove in nicely, and as you can see, all back and assembled, back on the bike, and when I inspected the O-ring around the spring seat, it was actually torn. So it wasn't torn when I put it back in, so it must have torn just getting it in. I don't know how, but anyway, I got a new O-ring, and it was, I think, I didn't get it from Yamaha, I just bought it from a dealer, like a bearings dealer, and it was a 30mm outside diameter cross section, 3.23mm, I think. So, and it was absolutely bang on perfect size. Anyway, got it all back together, absolutely fine. This one I stripped down, and the key thing is, when you are cleaning everything, is you need to check, is the damper rod bolt, does it freely screw back into the damper rod and back out again? And if the answer is no, you need to clean up those threads, because if there's any resistance whatsoever, it's not going to properly tighten up once it's in the bike. So anyway, I got, I was trying it by hand, and I probably didn't properly check it when I was cleaning it the first time, and it wouldn't go. It was tight, and I obviously didn't think it was a problem, that it was a little bit tight to go in, because I'm holding it and turning it with the spanner. But of course, you haven't got that grip on it when it's back in the bike, not with the wooden dowel, and certainly not with the spring pressure. So anyway, I got it in the damper rod bolt in the vise, and I give it a good old wire brush round, and then I got a die, and I basically chased the threads, and it's an M8 by 1.25, by the way, and cleaned it properly up, and then it was nice. It's screwed in and out nice. So then I just reassembled it all, and got it all back together and back on the bike. And as you can see, quick demonstration, it's absolutely fine now. So, success, the second time, but it just sort of shows it is easy when people are showing you how to do these things, and they'll say, careful of this or careful of that, you don't want to damage something. It's very easy to damage things, because I clearly damaged this seal. The O-ring clearly got damaged putting that back in, and clearly that one needed properly cleaning up before putting it back together. So I think somebody put Loctite in that previously, and that's probably because they couldn't get it in properly, so they thought they'd seal it. Stupid thing to do, just get it out, clean it properly, put it back in properly. So the only other thing I've got to do is, when during this whole disassembly and reassembly, the copper washer, so the crush washer that goes on the damper rod bolt on this side, is missing. So I've got some on order, so whilst I've assembled it all, it is still missing the copper washer. So it won't cause a problem short term, and when the washers arrive, I just bought a set of them for about £6 or £7. When they arrive, what I'll do, I'll take this fork off again, or disassemble it all again. I won't need to take the fork apart, I'll just need to turn it on its end, get that damper rod bolt out, because I won't lose any fluids or anything like that, and everything will stay in place. I'll just slip the washer on, do it back up, and then that should all be done.